that emerge and constantly change, and keeping a pulse on that has been a necessary skill in my work. So I developed these skills first by working in small team leadership experience. That actually, I had the opportunity to do that with my clerkship team. The clerkship role gave me visibility, but also access to senior leaders that have mentored and coached me. That was necessary. I gave my service time to UME and GME selection committees before I actually got FTE to work in those roles. And we'll talk about that, but you do have to decide what you're going to give your service to and what you actually expect compensation from. But serving on those committees was necessary for me to develop those skills. And then finally, just work experience with UME learners, understanding the learning environment has been critical to even my role as a physician who is working in admissions.
And so I probably actually had a slightly different path. I started out as a community EM physician, really with no desire, no sort of thinking about working within academic medicine. And it really took me about 4 years to figure out that this wasn't quite what I thought it would be. Actually, I returned to my home community thinking this was a way to really give back to people who had supported me along the way. And I would describe my career as a series of field promotions. This sounds so well-intentioned, and I would say that my life probably happened. I would like to think that there was planning to it, but really I think a lot of opportunities and how to capitalize on those opportunities. And so I started out as a clerkship director, largely, so after I returned to academics, I told my then chair, I want no part of research and I want no part of administration whatsoever. And then something happened. I saw myself really as a clinical educator for residents, really thinking about being able to be the conduit between what do you do at the academic medical center and how does that translate when you don't have all of those resources in the community. And very rapidly, really as the result of a colleague becoming critically ill, getting intubated in the emergency department, I got a phone call while presenting research with a resident in Italy that I needed to be the clerkship director and start the next day. And so that I rapidly discovered that I was ill prepared for the role, but was really an opportunity for growth experiences. Got me involved in curriculum, became involved in curriculum committees, and then sort of worked my way through the medical education side and the curriculum development side. I would say that a lot of those things really focused around what many of us do well as emergency medicine physicians, and that is seeing problems and coming up with solutions for those problems. I think one of the places that we are sometimes challenged is the ability to really think strategically, that's sort of 5 years out and what's our goal and how do we manage both sort of what we do best, which are immediate fixes, with navigating the how do we really plan and try to be strategic within the future. For me, one of the things that I think really came about that was helpful, maybe not always enjoyable, was the accreditation side of things. Had a lot of my very first LCME accreditation visit was in the midst of us going from being an elective clerkship to a required clerkship, and all of a sudden I was sucked into that, knowing nothing whatsoever. And so it was a sort of a baptism by fire along the way. And in that role, I really actually learned that I knew nothing about teaching. My parents were school teachers, and that was probably about as good as it got. So I went back and also got my master's in adult education. I did the teaching fellowship. Really, CDEM was such a powerful motivator for me because it also helped think about you're not suffering in isolation, which sometimes when you're trying to think about how do you solve things, how do you look at them as opportunities, and really being able to network with the people around me was incredibly impactful. Personnel management was something that we are not really trained well how to do, and so that is a necessary skill, and yet is not something that is naturally included in how do you actually navigate how to train your executive admin and how to do things, and how do you actually give up some of that control, which I had not given up along the way, as well as the budget piece of that. And so really looking for opportunities to be able to investigate those early, I think would have been helpful. Fortunately, I too had a mentor who I was looped in when I was the curricular dean to think about, okay, how does our educational RVU system work? How do we actually parse this out? And so I was really able to take that and be able to build on it in terms of my role now, where I actually manage the entirety of the teaching budget for the UME curriculum. I too would say I said yes to a lot of things, and not things that I always was really excited about saying yes to. And so you do have to navigate what is that time, but it really opened up a tremendous number of opportunities for me that I would not have considered before. And whether that was serving on admissions committee, I mean, one of the very first tasks that I was given was actually doing a grand round series within the department, and it was not a topic area that I was particularly excited about, but that gave me some of those skills to be able to build over time. And so I would say the other thing is there's plenty of opportunities to learn these things. You don't always have to have the skill set at that moment in time, but being able to recognize where there are gaps and then to be able to go out and find solutions to those has been tremendously helpful for me as well.
Okay, so this is going to be just a little bit of guided reflection that we would like you to engage in. So there is this paper that I always refer to in academic medicine by Chan et al., and it was called Finding Vitality in Academic Medicine. And it is something that I refer to consistently mostly at decision points in my career. And what that paper really highlights is that really there has to be some level of overlap in your mission, your values, and your goals, and that of the leadership to which you report, as well as the institution in which you spend most of your professional time. Okay, so it is incredibly important for us to think about our values, our mission, and our goals, those three things distinctly, recognizing that they will evolve. You have to actually take stock of them from time to time. So just for a minute, just consider, all of you, what your mission is, what your values are as a human and as an educator, and what do you aspire to do? What is your blue sky dream job? So consider that just for a moment. I'm going to pause here while you do that. Okay, so you know yourselves really well now, right? I've given you time to think about those values, the mission, your goals. You know, one of the things that I think it can be very unnatural to do is actually understand and communicate your value to other people. And this is definitely a skill that we need as we progress through medical education leadership positions. And so right now I'd like you to reflect on your existing strengths. What do you know you do well? What are the strengths of your existing skill set? And then I need to ask you, have you ever communicated that verbally to someone else? So what are your strengths? What are your existing skill sets? And consider whether or not you have actually communicated that to another person. How many of you have actually engaged in a process of regularly reassessing where your professional vulnerabilities lie or the gaps in your skill set? Is that something that any of you have ever, we have a small enough group, You do regularly. I think I will get to this question later, but I would have done that regularly. If someone would have told me to do that early on, I would have found great value in it. So right now, I'd like for you to think about that. Think about considering your ultimate career goals. What are the gaps that you can identify right now? And most of you aren't sitting close to one another, but I would like to encourage you to really share those vulnerabilities and gaps with other people, because that is how we remove some of our blind spots and get the input of other people that helps shape where we could see ourselves going. So this is a process that I have adopted in my own professional life. At least every 6 months, I'll go through a process of understanding what skills do I have, how are they transferable, and where are my vulnerabilities, and what am I doing right now professionally, and does that align with my values, my mission within my work in emergency medicine and medical education. So I encourage all of you to think about this periodically, recognizing again that it will evolve, it will change, but it can be incredibly useful, and it's very useful to share that with other people so that they can help you again remove those blind spots.
All right, so as you guys are all considering that reflective piece, we're going to shift gears slightly into our panel discussion. And again, I have a list of questions here for our experts, but we really want this to be, audience interaction and engaging and relevant for you. So if you have any questions about how to get involved with medical school leadership, please, we welcome you to come up to the microphone and ask your questions. And if not, you'll have to, get my questions that I've prepared. Do we have any brave souls? Yes. Thank you, Tishan.
Someone's got to break this. Thank you very much for a very inspirational set of talks about your journeys. My question really is, when you're in the dean's office, because I'm an associate dean now, and one of my blind spots or vulnerabilities is that I haven't done a lot of advancement work. If I want to go up in the ranks, that seems to be a question that comes up a lot, is fundraising and exposure. Have any of you done anything to really understand donors, networking, and what did you do? Thank you.
I can speak to some of that. So prior to taking on my role, I was not familiar with, for instance, you mentioned donors, engaging with donors and learning how to ask for money, essentially. And this is something that I did not get formal training on, and I learned on the job. And I'm very comfortable with that, actually. I think it was important for me to see others do it, to understand what we are asking for and why we're asking, and to feel confident in asking others to invest in that vision. So I think because I had gone through a process already of understanding my own vision, the vision of the school, it became a very natural thing to be able to communicate that effectively to donors. And so that is something that I learned on the job. And I think that there are other things that I don't believe I can learn effectively on the job. I think I need to still advance leadership skills and continue to nurture that part of my skill set. And to that end, I'm always looking for formal, structured education on leadership development.
I'll touch on that as well. So that has never been part of my job until my most recent job. And so I think to me that is something that is really challenging. I did not know anything at all about. Our institution actually offers a philanthropy academy where they really are encouraging people to get involved and learn more about it. I think some of the challenges too are actually figuring out how do you navigate that and how do you work in partnership with whether it's a foundation or whatever your institutional structure is that supports that, because there's also some potential stumbling blocks along the way. So what to promise people, what not to promise people, how do you keep people so that there's consistency in the expectations? And most of my work is around scholarships and support for students in the UME space. But that can be really incredibly tricky with donors, especially when they feel they have control over things. And so really figuring out within your foundation is how do you navigate that and work in partnership. I would say the other thing too is look at people who do it well. So I would describe myself as either an extroverted introvert or an introverted extrovert, somewhere in the middle. So for me, actually going to an event and trying to work the room, it is really, really challenging. But I try to look at people because part of this is how to actually make relationships with people, which I think I do much better sort of in a smaller group and one-on-one, and some people just gravitate to that larger setting. And so looking at people who do that well, and to me it's really about how does this fit the mission? How can I tell the stories of the students whose lives have been impacted? Because that really then speaks for itself and it doesn't require so much selling for individuals.
Thank you so much for that question. Anybody else? You can think about it and come up. Oh, great.
Okay, I guess I have a question. So in education, I feel most comfortable with emergency medicine, having been trained in emergency medicine. I see a lot of you guys were doing emergency medicine, started moving towards medical school or away from emergency medicine. How do you feel comfortable in doing that and still feeling like you're in your element and you're not giving up the thing that you feel most comfortable with, if that makes sense? I mean, it seems like Dr. Lawson, you fully are in the medical school, whereas everyone else kind of has a toehold still in both camps. I don't know if you could tell me your thoughts on that.
I will start and then we can. So for me, and I recently switched jobs within the past 2 years. So for me, I actually needed to still feel like I was part of emergency medicine. So I still do practice clinically, and that was a really important aspect for me. So I think for me personally, I became more comfortable because thinking about that sort of learner-centered approach, that I didn't have to be the expert at everything, and that I really was there more as a guide and to facilitate. And then some of my other strengths were really more in policy and accreditation and some of those other pieces. So I didn't have to know how to teach all of the content. I just needed to be able to have the skills to get the right team of people around the table to be able to teach.
For me, although most of my time is protected by the medical school for admissions work, I actually still continue to co-direct the clerkship, and that has been a conscious decision for me because I want that opportunity to again be connected with the learner, to understand the way the learning environment is changing and what the needs of the learners are, to inform other parts of my job. And so although I don't dedicate as much time to the clerkship as I once did, I still have kept my role in the clerkship for those reasons. And I hear what you're saying. I mean, we have, as a specialty, I think we are a very close-knit community. And I think for me, even in my admissions work, realizing that emergency medicine shaped me. It shaped my perspective on teaching. It shaped, again, my knowledge of the different types of care that can be delivered to communities who are particularly vulnerable and what that means for the learner, all these things. But I think I would say that I still keep emergency medicine with me, even in the work that I do within the admissions unit.
So for my role, I spend about half of my time working clinically in the emergency department and the other half of my time in the medical school teaching either the preclinical courses or emergency medicine clerkship. And I think it's a really nice balance, actually, being able to do half my time here, half my time there, and kind of avoiding the burnout that a lot of people face when they're in the emergency department day in and day out. In terms of what I bring to my first and second year courses, my preclinical courses, I bring a lot of kind of emergency medicine-based concepts to them. The course is clinical applications, and so I have to lecture longitudinally throughout the 2 years in every single block. And I try not to always make my cases emergency medicine based, but there's always a little flavor of emergency medicine in what I teach the students.
I'm going to add my 2 cents as well here. Again, I think some of what either innate characteristics that you have or the skills that you've developed along the way in terms of being an emergency physician will really help you succeed in these other arenas as well, right? We're really good at being uncomfortable, right? We're pretty comfortable being uncomfortable because that's what we face every day. So we can be brave and take on these new challenges because it's what we do, right? I think the other thing of just being somebody who can get things done, right? That also goes a long way in really, identifying yourself as a leader and succeeding in some of these other positions. And again, in the ER, we get things done, right? And then I think, like Luann mentioned earlier, right, being able to identify problems and come up with solutions like we do in our everyday clinical practice, that again is really a desirable skill in some of these medical school leadership positions. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Emily. Thank you guys for being here. For context, so I'm about partway through my fellowship, and I'm very interested in UME. I anticipate that when I start my first post-fellowship job, I'm going to be very excited and eager to get involved in as many things as I can to try and build connections and sort of get positions at some point, sort of move up within UME where I can. Can you all speak at all to how to find the right balance between overcommitting but being involved in enough things, and then also how to eventually transition that energy from kind of committing my own time to figuring out how to make sure it is compensated in some capacity?
That's a great question. I think one of the most challenging things about being a junior faculty member is you're going to be voluntold to do many different things, or you might find opportunities that you just don't want to say no to or don't know how to say no to, but you do have to make sure that you balance these things out. One piece of advice I would give is if you are interested in a certain opportunity, talk to people who are on that committee, who have done that role in the past, and find out more about it. Find out if it actually aligns with your goals and your mission, and if it's something that you'll truly be interested in. As Dr. Carter said a few minutes ago, there's a balance between service and compensation. And so in education, there's a lot of time that we spend doing service work and we're not going to get compensated for. Some of those things actually do go on your CV and are really nice line items and things to talk about when you're going for promotion down the road or going for a new position. So really thinking about what is important to you, seeking out those opportunities, and then again, trying to learn more about some of those opportunities to find out if they're going to be worthwhile to you before you say yes.
I think early on saying yes a lot more than saying no will probably do you a good service. One, to help refine what it is that you really like, right? Sometimes you don't know if something is going to be aligned with your values, if you're really going to enjoy it until you actually try it. So I think for me, saying yes early on was really important and really helpful. And then again, as you sort of progress and you fine tune what is really your mission and your values and that alignment, filtering out some of those things that maybe don't align as well as what you're working towards can be helpful as well without, overcommitting yourself, because you don't want to do things poorly. And I think that's the risk that we run. We want to say yes to a lot of things, but ultimately there's only 24 hours in the day and we have to use our time strategically. I think the other part of your question, too, that maybe our panelists can address in terms of negotiating for that protected time or looking for positions or roles that come with compensation or time, and how we can navigate those conversations and make sure that it's adequate for the work that's anticipated for the role. And maybe our panelists can speak to that.
In my experience, a lot of what I was negotiating for was informed by mentors and other people who had assumed those roles. So when I was negotiating for my assistant dean for admissions FTE, that was informed by the associate dean for admissions, who had insight into the amount of time that it would require. And I think it really is helpful to understand national benchmarks as well. And there are many different ways in which you can understand what seems to be the norm. And for me, I still love the AAMC meeting. I go every single year because I have found other specifically emergency physicians who do admissions work. And we are able to guide each other in understanding, how are we being supported by our institutions? And that gives a little bit more ammunition to go back to our institutional leaders and ask for what we want or what we think we need. It doesn't always work well, but it does sometimes in my experience. And I think so, making sure that what you're asking for is informed by those who are knowledgeable about your workload, but also trying to understand those national benchmarks to the best of your ability to be able to formulate a compelling argument for your leaders.
I would add on to that a little bit related to, from my position when I'm looking at or negotiating with people, or they're asking for opportunities, it's really so much easier if somebody actually has demonstrated some track record and some initial work towards something to then be able to level up and say, okay, you did this, how do we formalize this in a way and we carve out some FTE time related to it? I think one of the really hard conversations for me personally is somebody comes and they're like, I want to do this thing and it sounds great, except that they haven't actually done any of the legwork, they don't have any sort of track record, and there's never enough financial sort of resources to be able to reward everyone that you want to. And so to me, I'm always thinking about, how do we be equitable in this process and making sure that people are getting compensated as fairly as possible or as consistently as possible. And so I think that really goes back to the saying yes and thinking about when you're saying yes, making sure that you're able to really follow through on that, because then there's nothing that's worse than you have a bunch of things that you said yes to but haven't been able to follow through. But I'd also say to really be intentional about what you say no to, because sometimes people say no to so many things that they stop getting asked to participate in some of these other aspects. Because if someone's told me no 10 times, why am I going to ask them for the 11th time? And so really thinking about that in your larger scale, sort of the values and what it is that you ultimately want to do and how that fits into the larger picture.
Yeah, so sorry.
I was just going to say, in terms of saying no as well, there's ways that you can say no. You can say, I'm really interested in this opportunity. I don't have the time right now because I'm doing these other things. If this opportunity still exists in 3 months or 6 months, please let me know because I'd be interested then. So there are times you're going to have to say no even if you don't necessarily want to, but you're not going to have the bandwidth to do all these things.
Now, I think some really important points here, right, in terms of there probably is going to be some component of service in doing things for the good of the school or the good of the mission or whatever it is that the project is working for. And then also providing some evidence, whether it be national norms, means, local or institutional norms. Also just keep in mind too of keeping track of once you have a position, what you're actually putting in and what the whoever your leader is getting out from you in terms of productivity, and bringing that to the discussion as well. Again, I think evidence goes a long way rather than just saying that I need this for this, right? I need to see, like, this is going to take me this number of hours, this is what the norms are for this, these are the expectations that you're wanting me to meet, and these are the resources that I need to in order to be able to do this well. All right, I know we only have a few more minutes, so maybe I just want to give the panelists, is there a question? Sorry, please.
All right, I'll just squat. That's easier. So 2 questions. First of all, not a program director in that kind of role, but kind of about to start residency, so curious about your thoughts on two questions. First of all, if you know that medical education is something that you want to get involved in down the line as you start to build your career, what kind of steps would you take during residency to do that and make that happen? And second, undergraduate medical education is changing pretty dramatically and has and will continue to do so over the next few years. As you stepped into leadership roles within your medical schools, how are you balancing flexibility to those changes in medical education with kind of maintaining your institution's culture and the things that are very valuable to like the undergraduates and the things that med students really do like about their institutions and why they chose that place in the first place? Thank you.
Okay, maybe we'll take these one at a time. So want to do the first question in terms of how to get involved as a resident?
I think there are a lot of opportunities, I think, to get involved as a resident. And having somebody who is a point person in your department who works in the medical school is probably a good resource. So, for example, I would be that point person in my department. When residents have a desire to do education, I will potentially have them help me do a lecture for the preclinical students. I'll have them give a lecture for the clerkship or for the sub-I. I'll have them participate in simulation. I'll have them lead an EMIG event. So there's a lot of different opportunities that you can leverage in terms of getting in the lecture, bedside teaching, and all those types of things.
I think there's also a number of committees that you can get involved in, and then SAEM is a wonderful opportunity too to be involved and to begin to make some of those connections at national committees. There's numerous ways, I think, to get involved nationally and to go ahead and begin to get your foot in the door, to begin to network and really think and explore what are some of those opportunities. I would say, don't feel so much pressure as a resident, though, because we also really expect you to be a resident, and it's really incredibly hard work to be able to balance all of those pieces, too. And so even just one small piece of that, I think goes a long way, but at the same time, you shouldn't feel the pressure that you have to do all of these things, that really making the use of some of the bedside teaching and some of those other small pieces that you can really integrate first before you really think about building on and then thinking about educational research projects or other things really could even go further beyond that.
All right, and then our second question. So how do we successfully navigate the changing tide of you mentioned UME, but also GME or any kind of change, really?
What I'll say is that it is incredibly important that a program, a school, an institution not lose itself. No, in other words, we must always know who we are, what we stand for, what we hope to do, the type of learner that we hope to graduate. Remaining in touch with that is incredibly important because medical education is always changing. It will always continue to change, and also learners are changing. And I think as a specialty, it has been said already that we are trained to adapt. We are trained to not be rigid. And so as medical education leaders, it is important that we are in touch with the changes that must happen. We do not want to remain stagnant nor rigid, but also understand what our resources are, the bandwidth that we have as faculty, and as an institution, and leverage that to the benefit of our learners. And I think we're very fortunate to have a lot of medical education research that helps to guide where we are going and how we implement teaching methodology, how we can foster an inclusive and healthy climate amongst our learners, and maintain our vision and mission in graduating the learners who are prepared to care for our diverse communities. So I think that is probably how I would answer that on a very high level, and what I hope to continue to remain true to throughout, my medical education leadership journey.
All right, well, that's what we have time for right now in terms of our panel. I want to thank the audience for these really amazing questions and this great discussion from our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carey.
All right, so we have a couple minutes left just to give you some kind of take-home key points, things that we talked about and things we want you to think about going forward. So there are multiple pathways to medical school leadership, as you saw here today. It's really important for you to consider how to navigate these pathways for you to be successful. So you want to align your skills with your sought-after role. So we talked a little bit in the guided reflection. What skills do you need? What skills do you have? What do you want to do? So really think about those things and be thoughtful about it, and definitely make sure you're reflecting to be sure that you are going to be able to move forward with your career in undergraduate medical education. So take advantage of stepping stones. We all talked about some of the different ways that we fell into different opportunities or different opportunities we sought after. And make sure that you're thinking about those things. Develop the skills that you need that will help you in your next role. So mentorship is extremely important. Having strong mentors and sponsors are really going to probably make or break your career. And so finding a sponsor who can really champion your abilities and advocate for you, and a mentor who can provide you wisdom and guidance and really help you on your journey and your pathway forward. All of these relationships that you're going to form are really instrumental in developing your career as a leader in education. So then, one really important thing is not to underestimate your worth. So don't be afraid to pat yourself on the back. Any accomplishment you have, no matter how big or how small, share those accomplishments. Make sure your chair, make sure your vice chair, your vice chair of education, program director, make sure everyone knows, your medical school deans, make sure they know what you're doing. And sometimes if you don't advertise these things and let people know, they're not going to know. So really be sure to really market yourself and advertise yourself. And then also, just to leave you with one last point, reach back and pull up. And so what we mean by that is as you're moving forward and you're taking steps to advance your career, look behind you, see the people who are in your footsteps, the residents, the junior faculty, and find ways to mentor them, find ways to bring them on your journey, and so that they can have the opportunities along with you, and make sure as you climb that ladder, you're bringing your people with you. Thank you.
Standing ovation, please.
Sorry, one last slide. So we want you to think one more guided reflection. What is one thing that you will do in the next 6 months to close the gap that you previously identified?
Commit to it.
Thank you all. Oh, hi. Hello.
downstairs corner, so I was like,
Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you. No, it's okay. I appreciate that you're coming and supporting us. Thank you.
she was running the DI, because the DI committee downstairs.
Okay.
And I'm sure she got
Yes. Questions.
questions and everything like that. I thought that she wasn't running solo, but apparently I think she was.
Okay.
Because I knew that she was like, oh, I'm helping run the committee, but then when I was down there for the first 20, 30 minutes. I was like, oh, you're just running it.
Yeah.
And I was like, so you have very little time to like book it up.
Yeah. Well, hopefully was it
I'm
far?
in Philly.
Because I was like, this is a big thing.
It's fine. Second year.
Yeah.
It's going
Not
good.
as bad as like some
Yeah.
places. and stuff.
Tired, but good.
I was just at AM, but that was like a lot tighter, I felt like. Plus there's another. I mean, it's always
Trying to get into days again.
I've never been to SAEM.
Yeah, how about you?
You're at Rutgers, right? Okay.
as a med student, I was like, oh my gosh, there wasn't anything to go to. And then I just,
Definitely let me know if there's like some topics you like to talk about for like grant writing, so maybe I can like give you. I don't run that or do anything. And like everyone else, give your name to some of them. Pins. Yeah, you can. Yeah,
You can.
yeah.
Not one of the, I feel like
No,
sometimes
they have like all these little.
Yeah, I know. I feel like all the students just like gobble up
They
more and
do,
more,
yeah.
So it's just like,
I get you.
yeah, so, cool. I love the medicine behind it.
But the real,
God.
the real.
I guess they're all, but the main one. The main one.
But like in the city, it's like,
Right.
we all you and which side are you, and then Buckers have some now,
Yeah.
and exercise, and then it's like you can almost go just you can or you
In medicine.
Yeah, every
I
4
know.
days I had to do 24. I hated it. I hated it. I was like, I am not well.
Are you at Rutgers? Summit?
I'm in Rutgers. I'm in Newark.
Okay.
There's like Newark and New Brunswick,
Yeah.
two main medical schools. Big. It's big. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you think. Emily just texted that she's on the way.
Okay. So
She's just starting it. I feel like I can't see anything with the blinding lights.
Like the,
Oh, nice. He, I know he's like kind of like where's Waldo?
yeah.
So like you never know.
Welcome, welcome. We're just waiting for one of our presenters to come up from the DEI meeting downstairs, and then we'll get started.
Ashley and Tony.
I don't know if I should. Are you gonna sit there?
I can sit wherever.
I don't know, since I'm gonna get up and like go on the computer. It
We're gonna
doesn't matter.
switch off like
Yeah,
all
it'll be
lunch, then
fine.
I'll be like fine. Whatever you feel comfortable with. Because I think we go so back and forth, and then it's kind of like just a panel
Yeah.
discussion at the end. So I think we'll be.
I think it'll be good.
There she goes. There she. I know. That's why I was like, yeah.
Hi. No, it's okay. I'm Katie. It's nice to meet you.
I just put my stuff back there.
Control people to move forward, or is it just me who feels like that's?
Give me a headache after.
Yeah.
I'll let you decide.
You guys gonna be okay with this?
Squinting into the light and
Apparently it's streaming, so that's why they want like extra light.
all right, so we have
Tomorrow at like
yeah, on my computer. It's on it. Okay.
tomorrow.
Still is Make this up. Yeah. Does everyone
I have it on my phone.
put it on my computer so I can see? If you want to use it, you're welcome to. This is obvious. Can't sit in it. Here? No. I feel like we need a longer background. Okay, I think so. All right. So not even close. Yeah. You guys all feel comfortable. Okay, you've got nothing, but you're live. Okay.
It's the slides, or is there? Are you the slide advancer?
I'll let advance the slide. Sure. Let me see.
Do it too. It's up to you.
I can.
Great.
Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. So welcome to Free Stuff, SAEM's DEI curriculum, multi-center experiences, implementation tips and tricks. First off, we will just introduce ourselves and talk about why we're interested in this, and then we'll get to it.
First of all, can you hear us okay with the multiple mics, no weird echoing? Okay, good. My name is Rebecca Gett. I'm over at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School in Newark, New Jersey, where I am the department champion for DEI. And I'm interested in DEI as I'm interested in education. I think we have to educate the next generation, and within that education, it just includes DEI. Hard stop. All right. Kristen?
Hi, I'm Kristen Smith. I speak very loud, so you can probably hear me without the mic or pointed towards me. I'm a clinical assistant professor at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. I wanted to be involved in this curriculum because I believe, like learning EKGs and other clinical education topics in emergency medicine, it's important to have standardized and longitudinal resources that you can utilize for education, so that's why I was involved.
Hi everyone, I'm Stella. I'm one of the first years at Regents Hospital in Minnesota, and I was interested in this because I wanted to promote human connection and talk about and make everyone feel welcomed.
Hi everybody, I'm Katie. I'm one of the residents at the Hospital University of Pennsylvania, and thank you guys. The reason I became involved in this project is because growing up I witnessed a lot of health disparities amongst my family members and community around me. Medical school made it even more apparent, and I felt like I needed to become part of the solution, and I'll talk a little bit more of how I did that later on.
I'm Emily Binstadt, and basically I'm convinced after looking through some of the work in the DEI space that we need to work in any way we can to change systems, and I feel like this is one of the ways by including education in the structure, or rather DEI education in the structure of our educational processes, we can change those systems.
And then,
All right, thank you all. I'll mention that we do not have any relevant disclosures, but we do have one acknowledgement here.
yeah, I acknowledge the Hispanic Center of Excellence that helped me be able to travel to SAEM to give this lecture.
And then as we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered here to learn together on Indigenous land. This area that we commonly refer to as Austin is the traditional and contemporary home of the Tonkawa people, and also served as home to the Comanche and Apache peoples at various times. As we spend time together connecting on this land, I ask us to be mindful of historic and current injustices faced by Indigenous people here and across Turtle Island. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are important topics that have generated substantial interest and growth over the past several years. Academic emergency medicine departments are challenged to ensure that their faculty, learners, and staff are aware of these key concepts. To address these needs, SAEM's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee has developed a new modular curriculum that is easily accessible on the website, and it can be adapted for use in local departments to ensure structure and regular, recurring discussions to foster awareness in these various topics. It can be adapted for use to demystify DEI definitions and terminology, and to personalize these issues by highlighting relevant case studies. This 12-month curriculum is designed as a scalable resource to guide anywhere from 15 to 60-minute discussions with plans for ongoing updates and expansions in the future. Today, we will introduce the curriculum, its development and content, as well as how to access it. We will share some of our experiences implementing various pieces of the curriculum in our individual institutions, hopefully giving a sense of some ways that it can be used for different audiences. And of course, we are very interested in your ideas and feedback as this curriculum is growing.
So just going to take a few slides here to review what this project is. To address DEI needs in emergency medicine, SAEM's Equity and Inclusion Committee has developed a new modular curriculum that Stella was describing with these goals. We want it to be adaptable to local needs, clearly define DEI terms, lend structure to easily incorporate DEI topics into existing programming, to personalize DEI with relevant case studies, prompt discussion of local context, and enable equitable distribution of the task of teaching about DEI topics. So, next slide. A key idea in designing this curriculum was to make the resources scalable for different local needs. What does that mean? We found that the DEI concepts that people were wanting to present all relied on similar background resources, but that the learner groups, the time available for the presentation, and the desired presentation formats varied considerably between educators. So rather than have to create entirely new content for each application, this curriculum provides broad but reliable resources across topics. Thus, educators can focus primarily on refining their innovative teaching methods because the high-quality content is already pre-researched for them. Although sometimes PowerPoint slides may be helpful, death by PowerPoint is real, and organizing the resources that educators need to easily create their own presentations, we hope that we can meet more education needs than just creating a generic PowerPoint for each topic. So we swung the pendulum and developed a very comprehensive template for each topic, which included all the different learning modalities that we could imagine educators and EM might want to use to teach DEI concepts. So from simulations to journal clubs, quiz questions to lecture graphics and statistics, it's all in the template for each topic. And we'll show you that on the website shortly. So just a little bit of background on how this was developed. We brainstormed all the DEI topics that we could imagine, reviewed the literature to capture those that we had possibly missed, and then grouped these terms into topics. We then asked the Equity and Inclusion and ADIEM members whether these were the appropriate topics and if there were any other ones that we'd missed. And we focused primarily on DEI topics as they affect people working in medicine and less on the social determinants of health and health inequities, as those areas are being actively addressed by other curricula. However, there are obvious places where these two overlap. We also strive to credit those topic-adjacent resources where appropriate, and we'll continue to do that, and also redirect to other sources of important scholarship that may not be directly included in our curriculum. We also sought out authors and editors for each topic area from the committees and academies at SAEM, and over 60 individuals committed to creating and editing the robust templates of information available on each topic. And just to give you an idea, those average about 30 pages apiece. So it's a big commitment that people have made. They've provided valuable expertise, insight, and wisdom that comes with in-depth review of a subject, and their work affords all of us access to excellent curated resources that are organized to allow educational DEI presentations to become part of the fabric of daily life in academic emergency departments. So we currently have 10 topics published, about 10 more in process, and anticipate having approximately 20 when the curriculum is completed. And then we're envisioning kind of ongoing editing because these topics are always a little bit in flux. They're not static. So now we'd like to give you an opportunity to explore the resources in the curriculum a bit yourselves. Here's the QR code if you want to take a little look at it while Dr. Smith is going to do a walkthrough. You can also sit back and watch her version as well.
So hopefully everyone got to access the QR code. To me, the easiest way to access the curriculum is going on Google and just typing in SAEM DEI curriculum. That'll take you directly to this page. You can also navigate to the page via the ADIEM webpage. It's a little bit more convoluted, but you'll get there as well. So I think it's important just to note how much is actually on this page. You can see here that all of the curriculum content has been divided up into kind of themes. So there's key concepts, specific groups, strategies, tools, understanding burdens on URIM, and you can then access any one of these topic areas. Also, let's see here. Is it under headings? There we go. I had screenshots, so I apologize. Yeah, I just want to see the template. Oh, here it is. So we have, for each one of the topics, there is a template of the different content areas. So this is standardized. So for every single content area that you saw on the previous page, you have this template. So there's definition of terms. So these are all, researched and have references. So you can just quickly copy and paste them into any of the presentations that you're doing. There's also discussion and background sessions that get into some FAQs when teaching a section of the curriculum. There's also links to articles that you can use for a journal club, also ideas for clinical simulation, and many other resources. So I think it's just important to understand what is actually all included within the curriculum. So if you take, for instance, DEI terms, you'll take yourself to this web page and you can see each of these blocks. If you click on it, it then has text that then drops down. So here you can see all of the definitions that are within the DEI terms section. So diversity, equity versus equality, because that comes up a lot in discussion, inclusion. You can also see if you want to include any type of presentation slides that you just want to quickly download and put into your own slide deck, you can do that here with the references there. There's also different information on opportunities for how to implement this curriculum, journal club links. There's a lot of information, so I really encourage everyone to take a look at the curriculum and all of the content areas within it.
So now we're going to each discuss how we've implemented the curriculum over the last year or so in our own institutions, and it varies a bit. So we'll give you a little bit of background, and maybe that might spark an idea of how you might use it in your own shop. So at Regents Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota, our goal was to use the DEI curriculum to create an ongoing DEI educational presence in the systems of our department for both faculty and residents. We introduced the curriculum initially to faculty in a 40-minute faculty meeting, including a 10 to 15-minute demonstration of what a module might look like on a monthly basis. This monthly module includes a brief discussion of the term we're focusing on that month, and then a discussion prompt or activity to deepen understanding or reflection on the topic. We've done these activities in either smaller breakout groups as well as in large groups, virtually as well as in person. Our chair has also made a commitment to include a discussion of what each individual's DEI leadership effort has been for the year at their annual review in an effort to prompt broad faculty engagement with leading these sessions and to avoid substantial minority tax impact from instituting this new effort. The monthly faculty meeting precedes the resident didactic on the same topic by 2 weeks, allowing any interested faculty a heads up if they'd like to attend the longer resident session on the same topic. And the resident sessions thus far have been led by a core group of about 6 to 8 faculty presenters who use the curriculum to develop their presentation. I'll let Stella, who's one of the residents in our program, give you the resident perspective.
One more slide, please. So Dr. Binstad shared what happens at Regents program from the faculty side, and I'm excited to share my resident perspective. At Regents, we have conference every week, and for 1 hour each month during this conference, we incorporated various topics from the SAEM DEI curriculum into a longitudinal initiative. Topics included code switching, ableism, and so on. During this hour, various definitions, background, and discussion topics were introduced, both in large and small group discussions were had. And during this hour, it included faculty leaders who had already previewed the material. And because they had time to process this and reflect on the material, they participated more in discussions. And from a resident perspective, this enhanced my learning. Nursing and emergency medicine techs were welcomed during this didactic time, and it's always a pleasure to connect with colleagues and hear their perspective outside of our professional obligations.
So at our institution, we are lucky enough, there's already a very robust social emergency medicine curriculum that has been in place for quite some time. So the residents, medical students, and faculty already get a lot of teaching and education on the social determinants and health equity topics through that curriculum. But we did have the opportunity to hold a health equity related simulation, which Katie will talk about.
So this past fall, we incorporated a health equity related simulation. And this simulation was created by a multidisciplinary team that included physicians as well as nurses. And it was then reviewed by the leaders of our sim lab. And once we did that, we decided to go through with one simulation that talked about microaggressions, more specifically in the setting of a trauma code. And what that looked like was a patient who presented a very frequent presenter to the ED and how the nurses reacted to his presentation during a trauma code. Then the residents were blinded to what was happening, and we ran the code as a group, as you can see in the pictures. And after that, we had a debriefing session with all the participants and the leaders. And it was an open discussion where we talked about what we felt like, how we approached the situation. And after that, we went over a frame model to help us be up standards and address microaggressions in different modalities, more specifically the 5D models. And this included being direct in the situation or delegating somebody else to address the microaggressions that are being presented, or even displaying discomfort. And it provided us with the tools to approach a microaggression of the similar nature in the future. As somebody who was blinded and participated during the simulation, I actually showed the discomfort display, and it was quite effective during my encounter because it allowed the interns to realize that the way the nurse was approaching the situation wasn't appropriate, and that everyone deserves standardized care, if not even more, in the setting of minorities or those of color. And because they saw my cue of discomfort on my face despite having a mask, they decided to keep going and doing primary and secondary survey. But also reflecting back on this, it made me realize that I need to be better at being unbiased during these, I guess, confrontations, especially as a leader, because as a leader, you should always be unbiased and approach situations in a certain manner. But overall, it was a great way to gain insight on how I should better interact, and the interns also really loved it, to the point that now I'm a part of this and looking forward to working on other projects.
All right, so unfortunately, Tanya Strout, professor of emergency medicine at Maine Medical Center, could not be here, so I was asked to present her slides on how they utilize the SAEM DEI curriculum. They used the journal clubs to promote awareness of the impacts of racism on human health in emergency medicine for faculty, residents, and students. After attending a presentation specifically about the book, So You Want to Talk About Race at CORD, they decided to use some of these strategies to design a common book club type style event for their emergency department. Their primary goal was to create an accountable space to learn and discuss race and racism. So their chair purchased enough copies of the book for all of the learners, and they had approximately 1 month to read the book. Residents were assigned specific chapters to present, just as they would for an assigned article at a traditional journal club. Leading up to the event, they sent additional topic-specific supplemental materials that included supporting articles, videos, podcasts. This increased engagement and deepened understanding. Examples of topics that tie into specific chapters of the book included microaggressions, intersectionality, white fragility, and others. Prior to the event, they asked everyone to complete a survey with a validated measure covering 6 domains of transcultural self-efficacy. They held their discussion group outdoors at a local state park, which is pictured here. And they had 57 physicians and students participate in the event. And in the survey, they saw a significant increase across each of the transcultural self-efficacy domains, with the greatest differences in the domains of self-awareness and awareness of the cultural gap that it can exist between people of different backgrounds. In conclusion, using the materials and ideas from the DEI curriculum, Dr. Strout and her group was able to think about specific issues to address and then tailor the material to their needs. A lot of the legwork, including relevant articles and videos, was already done and listed explicitly on the DEI curriculum website, so they were able to pull together a fantastic event without having to spend a lot of time and energy starting from scratch.
Okay, and I think that takes us to me over at Rutgers. So we introduced our curriculum in, essentially last year, 2022. I decided, since probably like most people, if you get this started, you're going to be the N of one and to really build. So I set the bar kind of low in that I vowed to do 2 lectures a year. And so we'll start there, kind of see if the ball rolls, see what the interest is, and go from there. The lectures were roughly around an hour. They gave me an hour time. And then I just had the basic format that we've done over the past. So again, I did an intro, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, making sure this is an accountable space. We gave various definitions depending on what the topic was. Was it microaggressions? Was it minority attacks? Was it imposter syndrome? And then we had an activity plugged into that, whether it be a journal or a short video, or we did a small group discussion and kind of go from there. The good thing is, I think starting the bar low, you can only build the momentum from there. And so other things have come out of the curriculum that we've been working on. Like now, we didn't start with a book club, but that's the next thing coming. And we have a small but growing little tiny library. Like we physically got a bookcase and put all the books that the residents talked about or discussed into that. And we picked a book club going in the fall to start. And then also they said, a lot of the feedback we'll get into is that, we have a lot of speakers outside the DEI lectures, and maybe to incorporate DEI to all the speakers that come in and do our conferences, just not this one-off or biannual curriculum. So those are good ideas. So we incorporated those. And these are examples of a little bit of what we did. I think we did one tape just to open up all these, what is DEI? What are all these definitions? That was our intro to DEI lecture that I did. And I think the key was not just doing the definitions that we pulled off the website very nicely, but also on our website that Kristen showed is that there's examples there. So I think, if you want to get an engaged learner, like putting some examples in there, because once you start to talk about the definition, but also putting examples in there, then you get a lot of head nodding, people there, and by that time you almost start to get hand raising, this one time blah 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 happened, or they're ready to discuss by the end of this. And also I think DEI is a sensitive topic. It can be very vulnerable. That's why also you set the stage, but also I always try to include something in my lectures that's kind of a win. There's we hear about microaggressions, but also micro inclusions, little examples, what people have done to kind of overcome some of the barriers people face. And I have the story of Dr. Vivian Thomas and how he's now in a wall of faces that look very don't have a lot of URM, how he became represented. and it's part of that wall. So that way it's not such a doom and gloom sometimes topic, or people feel hesitant to dive into these topics. And here's an example, another one. We started off with a journal club about words matter, and just how an example, because I think we're very good at doing journal clubs and reading articles and dissecting them, how to dissect that article. And another thing is that I called, the second lecture we've done is imposter syndrome, and I just feel like we have to like meet the learners where they are, and my residents are very, I don't know if they're there, but they're very good, and they just don't absorb one media. Like, journal clubs are good, but if you tell them to, watch this video or read this, or listen to a podcast, I seem that the engagement increases, and you can absorb it a lot more. Like some of these, I think we're like, and it's always some of these we always have links to the videos, but some of these are just like fairly recent, that we'll keep on hopefully updating the curriculum as it goes on. But yeah. Oh.
So we plan to incorporate these 8 pearls into a new website section coming soon with advice on how to use this curriculum and what we've learned in the process of rolling out these projects in various settings across the country. So although you can see that the ways we've used the curriculum are quite different, there are some universal truths that we've found, and we'd like to discuss each of these a bit more so you can learn from our experiences as you consider starting your own projects.
Great. So I'll be talking a little bit about finding your champion or group of champions. So when you come across wanting to initiate DEI initiatives, one manner to be effective in doing this is actually by finding a group of people with similar interest. Usually when you do that, there is some passions that you guys share, and this can help motivate a group to really go about these DEI initiatives. With that said, once you do have a group of people, it's important to find the leader of the group, the one that will keep the group together and make sure that things get accomplished. But there's also opportunities that during your initiatives to find multiple champions and group of leaders. It's just important to know that if that is the case, that people get assigned appropriate roles and duties so that no one steps on each other's toes kind of idea. And then once you do that, I think it's important to remember to be kind to yourself. If you think that a project that you want to do may be very small, I think that even starting small is great. And if you're passionate about it, to go forward and start with this small idea, because multiple times, time and time again, people's small ideas can become great, or even a small idea can make a huge impact. But then if there's initiatives that have a lot of different categories to it or a lot of different ideas, that also works too. And the best way I think to go about this is by finding group of leaders or group of champions and having roles like many people who have encountered being a part of like LMSA or SNMA and having their respective roles in that case. With that said, once all of that is done and you have leaders, what then? Unfortunately, a lot of things aren't possible without money. So finding someone to buy into your idea and help fund it might be a little bit difficult. I would say go to your institutions or your department, see if they're willing to fund your ideas, and if not possible, maybe the institution as a whole. And if that is also not possible, or if you want to seek other revenues or ways to pay or fund, you can also look at national institutions or grants that are provided. And then once that's done, you can start working on your dreams and your passions. So I know that we talked a little bit about what we've done in terms of building this curriculum, but it would be nice to kind of hear from the panel if they would love to share, at least one of you guys, how you were able to have your institution buy into your DEI initiatives.
I think in our institution, we just have people that believed in the vision, and so both our chair and program director were willing to give the time. And I think money is one thing, but some of these things actually don't cost money. What they cost is time. And so I'm very appreciative of the willingness that our department showed to allow this to be part of the structure of the educational process for both faculty and residents.
Awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit about the minority tax. Quite simply, the minority tax is asking minority faculty, residents, medical students, and other learners to take on extra responsibilities in the name of diversity. And this can be okay if someone, says, I want to be a champion for bringing on more physicians to the department who look like me, or, I want to be included in resident recruitment or what have you. But it also can be taxing and burdensome if there is especially if there is no additional pay or clinical buy-down. So it is something to be aware of. I think a common question that kind of comes out of the minority tax and deviating and dividing up responsibilities is it okay for folks who are not underrepresented in medicine to teach these topics? And that's a really complicated answer because on one hand, when you see individuals, your first thought may be, well, what does this person know about, my experiences? And it can present as inauthentic. But it is also important to realize that asking some of the same leaders within your institution to always give talks on different subjects can also be taxing and also lead to re-traumatization, especially when you're talking about microaggressions and different things that have happened. So it's kind of, you have to think how to balance having people with lived experiences, so people who identify as being from underrepresented groups, with also making sure that they aren't getting the burden of teaching all of these topics as well.
So beyond openly acknowledging these issues, one idea for reducing minority tax is asking all the presenters of every lecture to include a slide, whether it's on, whether the topic is EKG, chest tubes, diabetes, OB, whatever it is, included a slide in their lecture on the DEI relevance to that topic. This prompts both presenters and learners to consider diversity, equity, and inclusion issues on a regular basis as part of everything we do in emergency medicine. And ultimately, we make progress with DEI efforts when they become part of the fabric of academic emergency medicine, not merely an add-on. So on this slide, we also list several other ideas for systematically incorporating DEI into the curriculum and making it everyone's responsibility to make DEI education a core focus rather than a fringe element.
Right, and then another lesson learned, 3, set ground rules. If you're gonna set out and do this curriculum, I think on further feedback and discussion with us as a group and just in general, is to set ground rules when setting up and remembering that these are very vulnerable topics, and to have, and this is also coming to our website too, to almost as a preface, if you're gonna teach this curriculum, to set up spaces. And people have talked about safe spaces and brave spaces, accountable spaces. They all are words that get thrown around, and I think that people have good meanings towards them. People say safe spaces, but you worry sometimes that people only say safe things in safe spaces, and you might not really be having the discussion that you really need to be discussing. And then people on the other end of the spectrum, people have talked about brave spaces where, oh, they're so brave and congratulating. I'm like, I don't really want to be congratulated or asked what I think of every other topic, just because that one person. And then so somebody uses this verbiage, and I just kind of like it. You can take it or leave it, to saying an accountable space. And then, we want to have discussions. We want to see what different viewpoints are. We want to see the intersectionality of where everybody's coming from. And then how do I do that? Usually, when you start off, I usually say, if you're going to present some DEI topic, to have lay out ground rules. You can either do it by a visual, which I'll show you next topic, or just ask go over and be like, hey guys, you know, we're going to talk about this. Remember to be mindful, give everyone a chance to speak, and then also realize that there's going to be disagreements, you know, and I say that, wouldn't it be weird, you know, it would be weird if we all agreed on every topic and had the same opinion on everything every time. That'd be weird. So I was like, expect that, you know, the senior resident, the chief, is going to have a different opinion from the PGY1, and going to have a different opinion from the faculty member that, you know, is not originally from, you know, the U.S. and has a completely different mindset. But that's good. That's why I learned that way. And then if you do get confused, I was like, just ask for clarification, because most of the time, if someone says something and you're kind of, I was like, most of the time, it's probably a communication thing, and they're just not saying it the way that they're saying one thing, and we might be interpreting another, and just asking. It was like, what did you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by blah, 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 blah? Like, I'm just confused, and it helps do any friction. Sometimes you like to have like bubbles or visual statements, and like the modified Vegas rule, residents seem to latch onto, that, you know, our discussion is meant to promote education, but, you know, this talk stays in the room. You know, if you have a grudges or you disagreement, it's not for you to go to the 3 to 11 shift afterwards and continue to disagree or argue or take it out on each other. It's like, this is a place where we can discuss, and then again, you know, be present, use the I perspective, don't speak for a whole group, because how can we speak for a whole group sometimes? And how do I do this? Like, how do I create this space? Usually I always say lay the ground rules, but I also give myself like my own introduction. I say like I am not the expert. I'm never going to be an expert. And much like DEI work, you know, when people talk about diversity or reaching equity, it's a muscle that you have to flex. There's no magical level where you'll be like, I am plugged into the system and I know everything. That's not how it works. So you have to keep on working and learning. And every year I learn something different from my residents, and they show me like what it is to be an educator. So I think having that own humble self when you go in there, I think is very valuable. Like, we have our Faces of Medicine, where we have people famous from over time and from different backgrounds, like on our wall. And we say, like, this will always be an incomplete study of who are the faces of medicine. And I think you have to approach the curriculum, you know, I'm going to get some stuff wrong as a presenter. I'm not an expert, but we're here to at least have that discussion.
Promoting discussion can often be challenging, especially depending on your audience. So here are just some brief tips that we had. Starting with definitions to create a common framework is helpful. And then secondly, often participants need time to reflect before sharing their ideas, so be comfortable with the proverbial awkward silence. Give people the space and time to participate. Use inclusive language, and then questions, as well as verbal and nonverbal feedback, are bound to happen. Know that this is not an attack on the facilitator, but rather, as a learner, it helps with information processing, so be open to clarifying questions. And then lastly, on some of the SAEM DI curriculum pages, there are facilitator guides that may be helpful to look through.
So just a little piece on implementing DEI-related simulation. So it's whatever time you have for developing the sim, just times that by 2, because it's probably going to take you a lot longer than you anticipate. Also, be ready to understand that most of the learners within your simulation are going to be hyper-focused on the clinical objectives, and sometimes the DEI-related objectives can get lost. So you'll likely need to make them very obvious and probably have them show up multiple times before learners catch on and know to kind of move on, you know, address this, whatever it is, whether it be microaggression or what have you. Next slide, please. And with everything, there are resistant learners.
Yeah. So, you know, what we've come to, and I'll try to get through this so that way you can take any questions. I think these are a list that we made as just faculty that we've gotten. You know, it's not an Olympics. It's not like, well, my family did this, and I came from this and this. I was like, we're all coming from different places, and just appreciate that everybody is at this moment, and it's pretty amazing to be, you've accomplished a lot, and I think it's not a race at all, like it's not competitive. And also remember that a lot of people are very vulnerable after hearing some of these topics or hearing what so many people have had to do in order to get here. It might make you feel a little bit more vulnerable. You'd be like, well, I didn't have to do all that. I feel kind of bad. And then you get the kind of deniers and generational differences. And that goes different spectrums. Like you have your old faculty member being like, oh, I've practiced in this hospital since, like, that's great. That's generation 1.0 of EM physicians that have had to accomplish a lot. But they might not think they need to learn about this. And then you get the other end of the spectrum, maybe like, your intern that's like, the faculty are the one with the problem. I'm aware of everything. I've been raised with this. I already kind of know the world that we live in. So those are kind of the two different spectrums. I would say, like, I welcome that, and I always put it on myself. I was like, I'm not an expert, so I don't know how, even if you're 20 years out in your EM profession, we still have to learn about all the cool new intubation things. I feel like we should also learn about, these new topics that are coming up, including DEI in the curriculum. And just like, you are 23 years old and, or 27, I don't even know what an intern's age is anymore, but like it's still, you're here to learn. So I think that we're all not perfect and we can all come away with some different things.
And as with a lot of times when you're teaching anything, there's never enough time. Especially when you're teaching DEI-related topics, everybody kind of wants to share their experience. A lot of times because they haven't felt like they've had a safe space to share, and they kind of want to hear like, oh my gosh, you're going through that, I went through that as well, and kind of develop ways to address it. But it's important when you're about to do a lecture to make sure you understand where you can cut out information if time is of essence for you. And also you can consider giving out pre and post asynchronous learning so that people can come prepared for the session.
And lastly, have a closing slide prepared so that you can skip to the end if the discussion gets really good or really long. This still allows a sense of closure, and it can shift the tone that sometimes gets a little depressing with some of these topics to something to leave on a positive note. There's a section in each topic on a call to action or quotations from various people on those topics, and that's a nice way to finish up the discussion. I think it's also important to recognize that the discussion is never over. We're never going to solve these topics in whatever limited time frame you have to discuss them, so leave the door open for ongoing discussion. And then it's critical to invite feedback with any new project and reflect and iterate based on it. Try not to take that feedback personally. You may only hear from people that are having really intense feelings about it, and just remember to consider the denominator and always take feedback as gift. With that, I think those are the themes that we've highlighted so far. We'd love any questions at this time or suggestions or ideas for using this in the future. Otherwise, thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, if you could please come to the podium. Yep.
Excuse me.
To the mic.
Sorry to make you run to the mic.
Sorry, I got Bessie. I was hoping that the panelists could speak a little bit more about best practices of inclusion in these topics in simulation, including digging in a little bit more, since we have the time, about what does it look like to overstate these topics? What does it look like in a simulation to help pull focus from what learners expect, which is that what am I missing? Where's their second pneumothorax or their third pneumothorax, right? To like, oh, there's another topic that I need to engage with here that I didn't even realize could be a part of the sim.
So I found in the simulation that we did, we had the nurse, so it was a trauma patient came in, Katie already explained it, but the nurse kind of at first was making some comments that were what we would describe as more subtle, and then started to make really more direct comments. So that was written into the script. So, if it was kind of like, If they don't do A, then you need to say C, if you will. So making sure that it does become a little bit complicated, but making sure that you have kind of these progression points, if you will. And also sometimes with these simulations, you do need to have a hard stop. So we had a timer that like within 8 minutes, if what we wanted to be addressed was not addressed, then it stops there, and then we will discuss everything after the fact. Because I think that, again, learners are so focused on the clinical. I think also you can consider not every, it does take time to implement a DEI focus simulation, which I think is needed, but you can also start thinking about what little things can I do to add to the clinical simulations we already have. So can I use a mannequin of a different skin tone? Or even bringing up, this patient was here several times and, with a rash, and it was misdiagnosed, maybe because it doesn't look as it classically looks on someone of a lighter skin tone. So incorporating some of those small elements into simulations that you already have is also another really time-sensitive way that you could do it.
I think what also was helpful, going back and remembering the simulation, was that we were told ahead of time that the simulation was going to be unique and something new. And that kind of was like, okay, in my head, all right. And while I was in it, I didn't realize what I was doing or that was the case in hand. But I think that the debriefing part is the most important part because it allowed us to hone in on what the main purpose of the simulation was and what we should gain from it and what we could do after, I think was also very pivotal to understanding and making the simulation very effective for all of us.
We've also done work, not with residents, but with faculty, where we've done what we called micro simulations and basically just did kind of like an improv type style response where you were faced with a scenario, rapid fire, 3 different small scenarios, and how would you respond? And there was, trying to support people in just whatever your response is, that's fine, and then we'll debrief about it. But that's another way to take it out of the more traditional sim structure and focus a little bit more on the DEI topic that you're trying to isolate.
Cool. Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
It's because they're recording it, so
I guess
then we can hear you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But I can hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you. I think to everyone that put in the effort for this. This is an incredible feat. It looks like it was a lot of work, but thank you. And thank you for sharing the implementation efforts as well. I do have a question. In terms of evaluating the curriculum, has there been any thought on how to evaluate this curriculum? And I'm thinking in terms of also the results from that can be used to support buy-in from people that are still, a little slow to get on board. Yeah.
So we do not have any formal evaluation process that's going on, mainly because individual institutions are using it however they're using it. And so individual institutions are also getting feedback. But if you're interested and have good ideas on that, I'd love you to join the Equity and Inclusion Committee and help us with a more SAEM-wide process for that.
Full disclosure, she's the chair. Yeah, and if you want us to help us out, there's a couple more topics to go on this. So if you have any residents that are interested, and also just please share this website because, we've had unfortunate discussions earlier with some leadership that DEI curriculum or DEI funding for certain things might be on the fritz in some states going forward. So just please push this. This is a national resource, and if you're in a point that might be lack of resources going forward, to use this curriculum and to keep the ball rolling.
And I do appreciate your comment about lots of work. I want to credit the 60 or so people that were involved in creating this resource, and it's not just the people up here on this panel for sure, so I want to give them a little shout out.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to go? What do you guys think? Get started? All right, think we're good to get started? Great. Nice to see so many of you here. Last event, or second to last event of the day, so thank you for coming for this. I'm Florian Schmitzberger. I'm from the University of Michigan. I have a fantastic crew here and a very great and big effort between multiple institutions that we've been working on over the last few years. This is work we're presenting from predominantly last year on a very unfortunate region, and I have the pleasure of working with some great people on this. Scott Donovan is here. He's with Global Response Medicine, an NGO that focuses on conflict regions and has been active in these regions and was one of the first on the ground in Ukraine, and he's done some great work there together with the rest of us. Jess Patterson, who's on here, she sends her apologies. She is currently in Warsaw, just left Ukraine for a follow-up project, so she's unable to join us today. Andrea Leiner, she unfortunately missed her flight today, or the flight got canceled, so she's unable to be here. She rerouted to Washington, D.C. to meet with one of the members of the Ukrainian parliament for us, and so just a little humble brag on that. She was meeting on this and was bragging about these projects, and then her flight got canceled, so she's unfortunately not here. We do have Sam Stringer here. Some of you know her. This work was done mostly while she was at University of Michigan, now at WashU St. Louis. We have Jerome Lee as well here, who's been talking a little bit afterwards about some of the great telehealth opportunities we've been working on. I have a disclosure slide here, and I'll get started with our learning objectives. The main thing we're going to talk about today is basically our implementation of humanitarian work in Ukraine with a focus on EMS. It's supposed to be a didactic with a very strong component of a panel discussion, so we're looking forward to questions. Easy questions only, please, today. And we'll basically talk about these learning points, but really this is for the people that are interested in expanding on this work, doing this kind of work. We're happy to share our lessons and really talk about these. We have 4 learning objectives here: assessing an EMS system and looking at improvements to the capabilities and capacities, looking at treatment and transport protocols, which is a pain in, in our counties and states, and even bigger pain if you're combining multiple municipalities, countries, and a war conflict. Being able to select the right personnel, and also looking at telemedicine in the support of disaster and humanitarian setting. So I'll hand it over to Scott here to talk a little bit about the work in Ukraine, humanitarian work in general that's been ongoing for the last year.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here the last one of the day. Again, my name is Scott Donovan. I'm the Medical Director for Global Response Medicine. What I want to do is to let you all know this is in keeping with that first goal. The first thing was ground context. We needed to do an assessment, and this came about by Ukrainian Ministry of Health and Ministry of Defense reaching out to the WHO. WHO reached out to us because of some prior work in places, particularly our work in Sierra Leone and Iraq. So it was to do an assessment of the ground context. Then over on the right, the system knowledge and resources. The idea was we can't just take our stuff in there. We have to see what things are in place, do an assessment of theirs. And for those of you who have done assessments of your own EMS areas, imagine, you're not in your county, you're in a completely different sort of context. And then to apply the processes there on the left of evidence-based medicine. Our group is primarily 1/3 academic emergency medicine, 1/3 EMS, and 1/3 military, primarily special operations forces. And so it's to take those groups and then to be sure that we are assessing what's going on and then to implement evidence-based medicine to make things better with it. We have, after the initial assessment, a rapid response team that goes in. We were first notified on January 6th. The invasion occurred on February 24th. We actually first heard about stuff at the end of 2021 when they started with Russian troop buildups in Belarus. So some 8 weeks prior to the invasion on February 24th, we got the word for a heads up. Florian was actually one of the first ones in there. He and I went in with the first team assessment following that. The initial idea, as it follows on there, was to do a rapid response team initiative, take a look at what was going to be needed, implement those, and then once that was complete, then to go back and do a reassessment, and that's the further action required or requested. Do we need to do ongoing things? If so, is it more long-term clinical care? Is it more academic capacity building? Our first line with what we were doing was multifactorial. It was to do emergency medicine and surgery there, along with the assessment, and then see what long-term things need to be done. Our team was made up of primarily 5 people. We wanted to keep it 5 because that way you could still kind of squeeze into one vehicle if you had to make rapid egress getting out of there. Typically, it's a special operations force medic. They serve as both security and medic. For those of you who've been able to work with them, they may be, we have one guy who's a SEAL Team 7 medic, formerly, a lot of Ranger Regiment medics, 18 Deltas, 18 Echoes, and we as emergency physicians like to believe that we are this sort of, jack of all trades, perhaps master of none, but we've got every sort of, we have to know our stuff plus the next step of the next specialty. And just about time that you think you are the well-rounded group within medicine, you are until you meet an 18 Delta. And then you realize, we don't have that. They can serve as first assist in surgery, anesthetists, anesthesiologists, nurses, medics, etc. Absolutely amazing. So the team was made up of an emergency physician, a general surgeon, hopefully trauma surgeon, an SF medic, an interpreter who hopefully, along with speaking English for us, also spoke, hopefully, Russian and Ukrainian. We had multiple forward locations over the course of 5 months. The first 2 rotations were at civilian hospitals. That was the first place that we were, quote, allowed to go to. Following that, they said, would you please come help in the military hospitals? So we rotated out of there into the military hospitals because basically at that point there was very little difference. The civilian hospitals were seeing civilian and military wounded. The military hospitals were as well. You're already aware that this is not a war where it's basically soldier on soldier. This is indiscriminate shooting and bombing of, it's absolutely tragic. Civilians, it would just be walking down the street trying to get food, and it serves like an arcade game for some of this. There were 724 surgeries that were done. Simultaneously, along with doing this, there was education that's being performed both in the hospital and with EMS, both TCCC, along with education for, hopefully, knock on wood, something that will still hasn't happened yet and hopefully won't, but for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons. Doing education for the medical personnel from the major hospitals, initially civilian, later military hospitals also. The territorial defense, which is basically a volunteer system, it's a civilian system that was set up to supplement the military aspect of it. The police and other EMS, and there were about 1,800 people trained in this, and it was a combination, again, of TCCC. One of the differences in TCCC, and to follow that versus TECC, there are several differences with it, but one of the main ones is that TCCC is set up for those primarily between the ages of 18 and 35 because it's primarily combat. And unfortunately, 18 to 35 was not the limitation, the age group that was often injured. With some of this, the main injuries that we saw, and Florian will talk about this later, and just some of the things that occurred, the disproportionate number of it, although it was penetrating trauma, you also had the unfortunate addition of blast trauma, because most of this was not from arms fire. Certainly, we often refer to things as small arms fire. I will tell you that AK shoots 7.62 rounds, and there's nothing small arms about a 7.62 round. You don't do the vascular evaluation that you're used to doing here in the States. For the 3 weeks or so that I was there, and I'm not sure if Florian there, because we overlap in the same place, I don't ever remember us using the CAT scan. So it just doesn't really work. So you're not getting your vascular studies and things like that. It's a lot of amputation parts with it. Unfortunately, there is a lot of emphasis, as Florian will discuss. There were problems that occurred in that although you've got the issues of being in the hospital with not only no potable water, but no water. They shut off the infrastructure, so there's no water coming in. It's not like you could get it, turn on the faucet and boil it. There was no water, period. They had to bring it in from a lake in buckets, and we had to filter it. No electricity, no heat in March and April. Windows shot out. So you've got those issues. There's also a lack of awareness about aggressive resuscitation before the OR. So there were a lot of people who, the tourniquet's not on too well, but that's okay, they're going to the OR. They'll get pain meds when they get to the OR. We'll do some resuscitation when we get to the OR. And so trying to educate that, and there were at least 6 arrests that occurred during induction of anesthesia because they were not adequately resuscitated. And it wasn't until we were leaving that after a couple of months that they were like, hey, you remember how you guys were trying to talk to us about that? Can you maybe kind of let us know? We were in Mykolaiv in the southeast portion, right between Mariupol, that you've heard about, in Odessa. And that was right after Mykolaiv sent the last missile to sink the Moskova, their hallmark battleship. And so at that point, we're like, no, we can't stay because this whole city just became a target. So we were able to get some of the teaching points across, but unfortunately, perhaps not until too late.
So I think you gave a great overview of the hospital-based care that happens in the more frontline hospitals, and kind of the lack of resuscitation, the initial desperate attempts at stabilizing the patients, and they're doing a great job at it. Big picture, right? The overwhelmed system and clinicians that haven't left their hospital since the beginning of the war, literally a year and out. There's people that live in the hospital and just never leave. The emotional and psychological toll of that I can't even begin to comprehend. So they try to implement all these teaching points, and one of the ways that the international and their national community has come together is trying to offload some of their burden in a sense of moving their patients after damage control resuscitation, which is the EM domain that they're trying to build up, and damage control surgery, which they're trying to initiate as close as possible to the point of injury, and actually move those patients towards the Western area. The country of Ukraine right now is a very interesting place. The Western and Central regions are perfectly normal for the most part. There's a psychological component of everybody being stressed about the war, knowing somebody who's off fighting. But you can have a spa weekend in central Lviv and a beautiful vacation and get married and have a wonderful time with the war ongoing. So you have a functionally intact country, and a few hundred miles to the east, you have a complete war zone with no infrastructure and crumbling healthcare infrastructure and really a huge humanitarian need. So one of the things they're trying to do is actually move patients from the east towards the west of the country, but also internationally. I'm very proud of the international community for coming together and actually providing a ton of care for patients outside the country. There's an enormous amount of resources being spent and a lot of goodwill in many countries all over the globe taking in patients. One of the difficult things with this is how do you actually move those patients in the country and then outside the country. So the WHO allocated some funds and said, hey, easy problem, right? Just like get some ambulances and just move these patients, right? It's not rocket science, right? Those of us who are involved, and all of us are involved in EMS to some degree, understand the difficulties with that, and it's not that easy. Imagine trying to set up multiple transfers within your state and coordinating between different transporting units, different agencies, different levels of care, and now different countries. And now add on to that military-aged men who generally staff these ambulances can't leave the country. So you have a very, very difficult problem from a logistics standpoint. Add on to that a huge acuity in those patients, them really being extremely sick and needing critical care transport, which we saw COVID, how it overwhelmed our system. And those of us who work in resource-limited settings, a lot of respect for people who work in very remote settings that need to transfer sick patients. Like, that is an ongoing challenge here. It's multiplied there by a factor of 100 because they just can't get rid of their patients that are very sick. So the WHO basically set up this overarching goal of like transporting patients out of the country and negotiated with multiple NGOs and state players and trying to like set up how to move patients safely and adequately outside of the country or towards Western Ukraine. Our part, I'll say there's a lot of people involved and a lot of great people that have done effort into this. It's very small. We set up 2 transporting regions, Western and Eastern Ukraine, over 5 months. We nearly got 8 transports, which doesn't sound like much, but they were mostly critical care transports with a lot of efforts involved in that. And I'll share some of the lessons that we've learned from this in case people would like to replicate this in another unfortunate setting. So the first thing I want to talk about is assessing the EMS system to identify the improvements. So a little bit of background. This is an example. I took a screenshot of some of our run sheets. Chief complaint, basically, like those are the types of transports. And the first teaching point here is a lot of this looks exactly what you'd expect, right? All right, cool. So we have TBI, we have GSW, we have fractures. Then we have dementia, encephalopathy, skin lesions. So that sounds like your normal skilled nursing facility move, right? One of the key takeaways here is that like EMS still remains EMS and normal problems still happen. I vividly remember taking care of a polytrauma patient and having to like hear from the next room over people fighting with the acutely psychotic patient who was also drunk, which is something that we all experience in our clinical practice. And it's a big lesson to like not get too focused on the apparent problem at hand, but also be like, well, this is still an EMS system that needs to function in the big picture. We can't take away all the resources because they still have normal medical and other emergencies as well. So these are the types of patients we transported. We were lucky enough to have adequate medications for the most part. And here's another challenge. Like when you design protocols, when you design any kind of EMS system, what's available for the medics? What's available in the hospitals? How do you deal with drug shortages, which is something that we're all dealing with right now in the States as well? How do you read Cyrillic? that's a little challenging as well. So we had a lot of our providers were on the ambulance using Google Translate, trying to like figure out what this ampule does before and like making little labels. So quality assurance in that is hugely important. If you mess up the dosing, if you mess up the medication name, that's a huge problem. So yet another very, very difficult thing. And internationally, different locations use different medications that are very similar. But I mean, just think about like your favorite induction drug and like go to a different location. Other places use different medications, and it's very different. You don't have the facility with those medications, so you something to keep in mind when you write protocols and you deal with that. And then the probably most difficult aspect is integrating into the response system. That was our biggest challenge, and we were lucky enough to have very reasonable players to work with. But here's the part, if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, this is very similar to a mass casualty incident. The logistics are huge. Spending the time wisely to interact with other agencies, having a clear command structure, was the absolute most important thing. This kind of work draws a very interesting crowd of people, no offense guys, but like it has a lot of people that want to do stuff, that are ready to go and that are ready to like get into the battle and just go and do things. We see this in a lot of our colleagues in emergency medicine. It's a characteristic we sometimes have. But taking a step back to actually integrate yourself properly is very important. Imagine if somebody showed up in your hospital and said, hey, you guys have a big boarding problem. I can just take care of some of your patients. I'm going to do a better job than you at this. That's not going to go well with you. So keep in mind, one of the things we had to work with our personnel and ourselves is how do we elegantly and like how do we bring the point across that we're here to supplement, not take over any of these systems, because that was certainly a lot of conflict, at least in theory. We ended up working together with multiple great organizations, working with existing infrastructure, which was in a country very fragmented. So imagine like in probably your counties and states, multiple EMS agencies that are not working together all that well, or come and go, and having to work with them, having a centralized dispatch, having open channels of communication, and then people wanting to get the interesting transports, or people don't want to go to these locations, other people want to go to those locations. Make sure if you ever find yourself in a position like that, dedicate the manpower to actually resolving these issues beforehand, because that was certainly something we found and was very, very challenging.
Hi, everyone. For our second learning objective, so we're going to talk about developing treatment and transport protocols for exceptional situations. And as you've heard, this is all a big exceptional situation. And so you have people kind of with different credentialing that are coming to Ukraine and from different backgrounds, could be from different countries, and then trying to marry that with you are in a different country that has different kind of practice patterns and resources, and so taking all of that into consideration when making these protocols. And so really before even getting into medical protocols, kind of a general treatment one that kind of has these principles, and you can read this, but the summary is that we will stick to the scope of practice that they're credentialed to do, kind of use general EMS principles as they're trained to do, and then use online medical control. And the part of this that we really want to focus on is scope of practice. And so, again, because of kind of this exceptional situation, specifically using some guiding principles that are outlined in this general treatment protocol. And so baseline scope of practice, having resources and references, and then again, online medical control. And we'll talk a little bit more about two of these. And so as far as baseline scope, again, this is a simple concept, but so important, is that kind of any of the clinicians working are restricted to kind of their practice at their level of training and current role. Because the last thing that we want is for it to look like we're going to a different country, to Ukraine here, and just kind of going rogue on our medicine. And so really sticking to this is important. And as far as kind of, there's some examples of protocols here, and in these is kind of different levels of intervention. Again, that kind of addresses that there's different kind of credentialed people that are working underneath these protocols. And Florian kind of talked about this a little bit, but then going back to trying to kind of marry the fact that you're in a different country, different resources. If you have critical care transport that's on vasopressors, and someone usually uses norepinephrine, and all of a sudden all they have is kind of dopamine, and maybe it's in a different language, and so trying to be as kind of give different options and kind of be as specific in the protocols that you can. And then lastly, online medical control, another kind of even more important in this setting. And so making sure that it's 24/7, maybe multiple people online medical control, kind of accounting for different time zones. Again, maybe it's hard to reach someone for a certain reason, and also having those people kind of provide multiple options, maybe not knowing what exactly the circumstances that they're that the crew is practicing in.
The second to last learning point really is the personnel management stuff, and that's something that all of us have dealt with in the emergency department. Personalities are very strong. They have different backgrounds, and how do you reconcile that in a foreign country? You have basic life support, you have advanced life support, you have critical care transport trained personnel. You have a physician-based system in Ukraine that's now transitioning to a paramedic type system, which posed extreme challenges, like who's allowed to do what? Can you even continue on this medication? Who can start medications? The point I want to really get into, because this is very specific, and if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, you'll have to deal with this no matter what. The personality and the personnel selection really, I think, is the key point. We had very interesting people apply to do this job. The volunteers that jump to this are an interesting bunch, and all of them are motivated. Not all of them are suitable for this type of work, and that's our responsibility as the physician on the team to really assess as well, because ultimately you carry the responsibility for the medical operations. We had one person say to us, all right, we have this Medevac West and Medevac East, and everybody wanted to be in Medevac East, because you want to go to the cool places, right? You want to be near the front line and transport the sickest patients, and then come back and take some cool selfies and put them on Instagram. And we really, the need was the strongest for Medevac West, actually. And the people that were pushing for the Eastern part, it was honestly not a very successful program in the East because the need was not there. And the local infrastructure, Ukrainians are very resourceful, and they had set that up and they took great care of that. I remember one guy coming up and being like, you know what, we need to go east because we can really show them what we're made of. And that is a huge red flag. That kind of thinking, it sinks an entire operation. One rogue player can really derail an entire system, and has done so at multiple locations in Ukraine by rogue players not doing well and overstepping the boundaries. And this is where we have the responsibility as the medical control for this to make sure you select the right people and stay within reason for all of this. There's different responsibilities. You need to make sure you have the safety of the team and the patient in mind. So you're responsible for patient safety, but you also need to plan for contingencies. So you have the right people, you have the right location, you have the logistics set up. Now you really need to have a very strong plan for all kind of eventualities. I wrote some stuff down there. I won't bother reading it all off here. You can do that as well. But really the key thing is always having multiple plans and being prepared for these things, because some of them will happen, and being ready for them is absolutely important. So we had extensive safety plans for individuals, for our vehicles, our insurance, and everything else. We had we have personnel dedicated to the safety aspect of this. So all the operations have dedicated safety personnel who have a background in this and do this full time for our operations. And that's something to really you shouldn't skimp on that. That's like the most important aspect, because again, one incident will cause your whole operation to fall and stop. And you really can't afford that, because in the end, don't get hurt yourself, because if you do, the entire operation is gone and you won't be able to help anybody else anymore. So we had contingency plans, medical plans, all these important tasks were defined beforehand. And really having constant security assessments and reassessments is like the absolute most important part. Being able to like be certain that you're staying away from any kind of trouble, being safe in what you're doing, and having real good contingency planning in case your assessment was not correct.
Well, thank you all for being here. For the last section, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've sort of done with digital health, telemedicine to support Ukraine. And this is all through the work of an NGO called Health Tech Without Borders that a few of us co-founded, where I'm going to focus on sort of three pillars. First is our telemed component, then a virtual education component that we've worked on, and also this last component of sort of building out the digital healthcare system and digital ecosystem for a better humanitarian response. It's funny though, I'll say that, you know, pre-COVID, I was one of those docs that didn't really believe in telemed, and now I'm running a telemed group, right? But it's like one of those things that was shiny, the tech was there, I just didn't want to do it for all the reasons, right? I'm EM critical care, and so a lot of it flowed through our ICUs, but it was still one of those things that I just wasn't really sold on until COVID, right? And then we did so much telemed during COVID that was one of the silver linings with COVID, that it shows that it works, and it works well for the right use cases. But we have to be careful and use it in the right use cases. So, so I'm representing Health Tech Without Borders here as a co-founder. It was one of my disclosures, but just for full disclosure. So after the initial war started, right, in February of last year, a group of us got together and realized that they probably are going to need help. The healthcare system probably will not be fully intact to the point where there's some help that we could probably deliver remotely through telemedicine. We didn't know if it was going to work or not, but we were going to try, right? And so it's kind of nice. I think you've heard sort of this running thread that it was nice to sort of see the global community come together around this, where we had a call to action, and we put it out for both tech companies and clinicians to come forward and volunteer their time and in-kind support of their technology to do something within Ukraine to support the population. And it's pretty great to see where we had 40 plus tech companies come forward that offer their technology all pro bono, plus their programming time, of course, and server times. And then we had over 800 clinicians from 20 countries that all volunteered, right? And the great part too is that, unfortunately, you know, a lot of us and a lot of folks cannot go physically into Ukraine, but there's still other ways to help. And so from, you know, your office or as a clinician, you could spend 2 hours a week and be able to still help out in some way. So it was a mad scramble of working through the tech companies, figuring out what use cases would be best for these tech companies. If you can imagine, a lot of them just didn't work well in the environment that we needed them to, right? And so we ended up going live with 3, 2 EU-based, pretty big telehealth companies, and 1 pre-war Ukrainian telemed company that turned pro bono with us with the war. And so I'm happy to report that by, you know, since the start of the war, we've already done about 100,000 consults to Ukrainians and refugees within the country. It's all primary care related. And we're really down to only 1 telemed company. And it's one of the lessons that we learned is, even though the 2 other European EU-based telemed companies were probably more robust in terms of technology, they just didn't get too many patients. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? They weren't known, it probably wasn't really built properly for what they needed to do. And people just didn't know them and probably didn't trust it with all the things that were happening within Ukraine. And so the one that was most active, of course, is the telemed group called Doctor Online that was already active there, and people already knew them, and so trusted them in so many ways. And so our whole process, we did document well. We're hoping that it can be used in other humanitarian crises in the future. So if you guys get bored, we did publish it in New England Journal Catalyst. You could sort of see a lot of what we took care of was really all general care. It was all primary care. The stories we got were really about, like, families that couldn't really access the healthcare system for some reason, but had like their 2-year-old with a fever, but just needed some warm contact with a provider or clinician so they could figure out what to do next. Is it important enough to take that step to go to the hospital or find a healthcare point of contact or something else, right? But it was really all primary care, right? We weren't involved in the trauma and everything else in the hospital level, of course, since we were all really taking care of the populace instead. A lot of pediatrics, some OB, but really a lot of just general care, preventative care questions that people had and needed access. So we also started doing more peer-to-peer consults and sort of got involved in different groups. And one big one was around rehab medicine, where we started working with the WHO cluster on rehabilitation medicine because we heard clearly that the rehab system within Ukraine for the war casualties, the amputees, the TBIs, wasn't as robust as other places. And of course, the US and the European Union hospitals probably couldn't absorb and will help and take some, right? We took some even at my hospital, at Mass General, took a few. But it's not, it's like a handful at best. And so there was this huge need for developing and capacity building of rehab medicine within the country. So we helped run a lecture series, all online. If you guys ever get bored, you're welcome to watch all the lectures. It's about 17 lectures from pediatric amputees all the way to traumatic brain injury. We got faculty from across the world, right? And so it wasn't just our faculty, but there's multiple faculty from different rehab centers across the world, from Israel to United States to different places within the EU. That have given amazing lectures to sort of work through it. But the other big program we realized is mental health that we had to support through digital health. We took a different stance though. So we spoke with some of the European-based mental health groups that were turned on a tele-mental health system in Ukraine, right? So that they can support the populace as well with whatever they need. Since I think the mental health needs, everyone sort of understood that it's going to be huge, especially as this continued. What we heard was the volume wasn't that high, probably because of what I talked about before was there probably was some distrust in technology, the systems not really knowing who's on the other side, right? And it's all new tech and new apps to download, which can be scary, especially in the wrong environment. But for us, so what we decided to focus on was we wanted to support the mental health specialists within Ukraine to continue doing the work they need, right? And so we called it the Helping Healers Heal program, where we have our social workers, mental health specialists within the US who speak the language have been doing essentially one-on-one and group sessions with a cohort of mental health specialists within Ukraine so that they can continue seeing the patients they see. And also we're a resource for what they need, right? So we've heard that, for example, a lot of them have never taken care of pediatric patients who need some type of mental health support. And there's a lot of that now. And so we were able to sort of bring together resources and share that with them virtually as well. But the biggest component from what we've heard from them is really about how they need support. And we know that from COVID, right? We all need support as clinicians so that they can continue hearing the horrible stories. There was no outlet for them. So we became that outlet in so many ways, and a lot of them said that they probably would have quit and stopped taking on patients as Ukrainians within Ukraine, right, unless without our program, 3H. So in terms of the ecosystem, we started thinking about what other technologies we could leverage to support Ukraine, and not just Ukraine, but also other humanitarian disasters around the world. So one of our partners is Microsoft. I don't work for Microsoft, but it's this is the HoloLens, if you guys haven't seen it. It's an augmented reality helmet that you can sort of see, and the surgeons have been using it for years, right? You can sort of beam yourself into an OR room somewhere else and watch the other surgeon and their hands and sort of, give them advice in real time by drawing on the screen or whatever it is that they can support each other remotely, right? So that makes a lot of sense, and a lot of that's being done by our surgical colleagues. So we decided, with the rehab medicine work, it's pretty high touch, right? It's physical therapy, occupational therapy, amputees walking to figure out the prosthetics are correct, right? And so we've been testing this now. We haven't used it yet, but we have 2 devices at our rehab hospital in Boston right now, testing it with our MIT colleagues to see if this is feasible. We're doing regular rounds with patients in Ukraine via Zoom right now, but I think we're going to try to use something like this to make it more high fidelity. The cool part too is our MIT colleagues, of course, are reprogramming one of these HoloLenses that they have, and they're able to track how someone, if you just watch someone with this walking down the hallway, they could see all the points of movement and sort of see if that prosthetic is working correctly or how you can redesign that prosthetic to make it better. The other thing we've been working on is sort of chatbots. So interestingly, we started this about 8 months ago, well, 6 months ago before ChatGPT started, right? So what we created was a dumb bot. It's not smart at all. And so, in many ways, we didn't want it to be, right? So we loaded it up with Stop the Bleed and TCCC to sort of teach folks whatever they need within, right? And so we finally got it to a point where we put it into Ukraine about a week ago, and it's now live. It is only available in Ukraine. It's available both in English and Ukrainian. And we started thinking about what the next generation is, and we will probably use generative AI and all the ChatGPT type, frameworks to build a better AI that would be a little more interesting in the future. And I think that's all I have. Thank you, guys.
I think we have a few minutes for questions, so that's the important part. If anyone has any questions, please. Or we can go home, that's fine too.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys had a lot of limitations in personnel with things like this for transport. Did you help, or was there any expansion of the protocols and scope for paramedics or whoever was functioning as the transporting providers to allow kind of a little more flexibility with who's able to do what?
Yeah, Sam kind of alluded to that before as well in terms of the different scope of practice. What we basically did is a hard ceiling of what is your home scope of practice. Do not exceed that under any circumstances. We never got to the point of using any of your fancy telemedicine components for medical control, but we did have a dumb be able to call us, use satellite phones and all that for online medical control in order to resolve any kind of problems with that. Protocols were kind of tiered based on minimum standards. We never sent basic life support on critical care transports, for example. The other difficulty really was you have different countries as well. So you have somebody from Europe and somebody from the US coming in, trying to do medicine together. It's the same medicine, broadly speaking, but they'll be no, we use this presser, no, we use this one. Are you stupid? No. And it causes conflict, and that's where the protocol development was important to deconflict that and fall back to local protocols. Can't make people angry by using protocols that are not in the local standards, right? Those of us in EMS, we know when you have transports through a different state, that turns a little interesting as well, right? So those are the types of problems we dealt with, and we definitely tried to adjust based on the competency level of the providers on the rigs.
Excuse me, folks. We are streaming this session. If you could use the aisle mic for your questions, we would appreciate that. Thank you.
For the education and some of the training that you guys provided to the providers on the ground, did you guys have a prescribed thing that you guys were going to bring to teach them, or was it more so I'm going to bring the expertise that we have and try to optimize the care that you have with the resources that you have on the ground there?
So I don't know if this is on, is this good? So we typically follow TCCC, ATLS, to a great degree, even though you're in the hospital. We even had the format and the curriculum that was already present from Stop the Bleed. So we had our both the well-known standard studies such as those and the the curriculum in those, as well as those that we bring to from our different institutions, whether it was, Harvard, Michigan, Temple, wherever, and we took those in there as well. I think part of it was, when we talked about selecting appropriate personnel, part of this, I think even a bigger part, is selecting the appropriate personality. And you have to mesh into their system. And I don't care how strong you are clinically, if you're putting off the host country, you're putting off the host hospital, you're not going to get anything done, and you're really just burning bridges. So a big part of that was to integrate in and win the hearts and minds. And to that end, they'd had a lot of trauma occur, not just within the country, but to their society, to their persona. And they were a little bit hesitant to take on some outsiders to do things. And it wasn't until after you won the hearts and minds that they were like, hey, by the way, that stuff that you were talking about, we're kind of ready. There's an old saying that, when the student's finally ready, the teacher will appear. And they weren't ready for some of that until after we won the hearts and minds, and that took some time. And if you've got the personalities that aren't right for that, it's just going to throw more roadblocks into it. So I think that's a big part. But we did follow those things that are already established, and then brought in our own from our own institutions.
Christine Brand from University of Michigan. Speaking of meshing, can you talk to how you guys troubleshooted intercontinental interagency ICS structure creation?
Yeah, we can give another 50-minute lecture on that. It honestly was one of the most challenging aspects, and it was a lot of time spent before the transports actually happened to make that work. So we basically had, all of this was under the auspices of the Ministry of Health in Ukraine. So that was nothing went without their approval. So we had to make sure that we really followed their command structure, and they told us exactly what would happen on each level. It was up to the different NGOs to establish dispatch and different organizations, with the WHO helping in terms of providing frameworks for that. It was very much an impromptu kind of effort with many meetings and making sure that all are involved. The slight benefit was that this was transport and not scene response, which helped in terms of the decreased chaos. If 2 ambulances would show up for the same patient, it wasn't the end of the world. But that's why we had spent a lot of time in the beginning to deconflict that and actually talk. Ministry of Health says, you guys are doing this task, transporting patients, and we split up internally. This organization is going to focus on dispatch, this organization is going to focus on these transports, and constant reevaluation, constant talking. I wish it was a more defined command structure, like ICS level kind of thinking. It was not generally, but we worked hard on this, and we had great organizations to work with as well. Thanks for your question, Dr. Brent.
Thank you for the presentation. Adam Levine from Brown University. I was at the UN Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week in Geneva recently, and WHO did a big presentation on their emergency medical team initiative and the rollout of it actually around medical transport in Ukraine. And I'm wondering what your perspective was on how well that worked in terms of coordinating medical transports and also just general medical response from multiple different teams around the world coming in.
It's certainly something, thank you for the question. The EMT, the Emergency Medical Team project by the WHO, is something that they're trying to stand up right now in terms of increased importance of, let's not all just rush in and have a good time. That's not how a humanitarian response should work. And having one of the big players in the field trying to provide a structure to that is essential in my mind. There's so many people, organizations that are just interested in helping with big quotation marks and best intentions, but it doesn't help if you're not trying to integrate and play nice in the sandbox with the other kids. And this is one of those frameworks that I think is absolutely essential and will be even more important in the future. There's multiple guidebooks coming out by the WHO that we're involved in that trying to move in the right direction for these responses, because otherwise it's just chaos and doesn't really help if you don't actually think about how to actually logistically approach this properly, and a lot of wasted effort. A ton of money gets wasted on things. It's crazy. All right, well, I think we're exactly at the time, so thank you so much for your time and patience.
All right, everyone. I think it's about time to get started if you all want to get home at the end of the day. So good afternoon. Thank you for staying late with us this afternoon. I'm Jonathan Dial. I'm an assistant professor of emergency medicine with the University of Texas, Houston. And today, I'm pleased to share with you the top global emergency medicine articles of 2022 on behalf of the Global Emergency Medicine Literature Review. I have no disclosures to report, and before we get into the top articles, I'd like to give you some background as to how they were selected. The Global Emergency Medicine Literature Review is in its 17th year of publication in academic emergency medicine. As a part of the review, our mission is to highlight and disseminate high-quality global emergency medicine research, illustrate best practices, stimulate additional research, and promote the further professionalization of global emergency medicine. Although we are not a systematic review or a meta-analysis, we do have a rigorous structure and a standardized approach. The initial review begins in PubMed with a keyword search in several languages that highlight important themes in global emergency medicine. As shown here, the search emphasizes both emergency terms and global health terms to cast a wide net in our search for the best articles. The search is performed twice a year, initially in August and then subsequently in December, to capture all of the best articles possible in that time frame. A separate hand search of other key journals is also performed to make sure that all appropriate articles are included from these high-yield sources. Once the initial search is performed, the tens of thousands of articles that are collected are then screened for their relevance to global emergency medicine. Specifically, all articles that are selected at this stage must fall into one of the three categories listed above, either emergency care in resource-limited settings, disaster and humanitarian response, or emergency medicine development. They're then identified and categorized as either original research or review, and as either quantitative or qualitative research. After screening, the hundreds of articles still remaining are then scored and evaluated using standardized rubrics that consider their clarity, study design, their ethics, their importance to the field of global emergency medicine, their likely impact on global emergency medicine practice. The top scoring articles are then given a full review and summarized by members of the Global EM Literature Review team. In addition to the main review, a separate search is made through the gray literature, meaning articles published through less formal communications, including news bulletins, practice guidelines, and other media. We specifically search the websites of the organizations above to make sure that these high-yield organizations are well represented in the search. As you can imagine, this is an enormous and coordinated effort requiring steadfast and dedicated commitment from the nearly 50 review members described above. So with tremendous thanks to all of the Gemler team, let's dive into the top articles from 2022. This year's search yielded almost 60,000 articles, of which 527 were selected for scoring, and the top 33 articles were then individually summarized and reviewed. For this year, the top scoring original quantitative research article comes from Elbai et al. In the Chinese Journal of Traumatology and is entitled Assessment of Patients' Outcomes After Implementation of the South African Triage Scale in an Emergency Department in Egypt. By way of background, as we all know, ED overcrowding is a global problem and some countries have identified it as a national crisis. Among other interventions, various triage methods have been employed to combat ED overcrowding. Developed in 2004, the South African Triage Scale is one of several ED sorting systems that have been applied to address this need. The objective of this study was the evaluation of the effectiveness of SATS to reduce patient length of stay and mortality rate at the Suez Canal University Hospital Emergency Department in Egypt. The study was conducted in 3 phases. First, a pre-intervention phase, where 115 patients were assessed by the traditional protocols. Then a second intervention phase, where a structured intervention program was implemented to train ED staff. And third, a post-intervention phase, where 230 patients were assessed by SATS. All patients were then re-triaged after 2 hours, the length of stay per patient, and mortality were assessed. As demonstrated in their Table 2, after implementation of SATS, there were significant improvements in the basic clinical assessment of presenting patients and improved evaluation for early warning signs for poor clinical outcome. Table 6, on top, also shows significant changes in the disposition of emergency department patients after SATS implementation, indicating reduced rates of over or under triaging. Most importantly, Table 8 demonstrates a significant mortality benefit after implementation, with a 2-fold greater odds of survival after the implementation of the SATS method. Further results demonstrate a dramatic reduction in the length of stay in the emergency department, from 180 minutes before the intervention to 50 minutes after the application of SATS. Prior to the implementation of the method, 15% of the patients died before. This then decreased to less than 11% of patients after the intervention, correlating with the 2-fold improvement in patient mortality. The authors conclude that the SATS improved the initial assessment of patients presenting to the emergency department, resulting in decreased length of time and a reduction in mortality rate compared to their traditional protocols. Our next article is the top scoring article of original qualitative research and comes from Green et al. In BMC Public Health. It is titled, "Most of the cases are very similar, documenting and corroborating conflict-related sexual violence among Rohingya refugees." For background, in August of 2017, a large population of Rohingya from Rakhine State in northern Myanmar fled to Bangladesh due to Myanmar security forces' clearance operations. This study then sought to document the patterns of injuries and the conditions experienced by the Rohingya, with a specific focus on sexual violence. Qualitative interviews were conducted with 26 healthcare professionals caring for refugees in this setting. A semi-structured interview guide was used to capture respondents' background and their work experience with this population. Key topics included their professional background and the context of their work with the Rohingya, their experiences treating these patients and injuries observed due to physical violence, their experiences treating patients in relation to sexual and gender-based violence, the mental health status they observed in their patients, factors associated with the disclosure of sexual and gender-based violence, and challenges in providing healthcare and addressing trauma. Some representative quotes from this work are shown here. A nurse midwife commented that most of the cases are very similar. Families killed in front of them and then raped. Survivors escaped in the bush across the border. A clinical psychologist also commented, "We found that most of the refugees were suffering from PTSD. They didn't feel comfortable in talking with us. It was like having come through this crisis, many of them seemed to be totally blank. No emotion was working in their mind. They cried continuously, and upon being asked anything, the first answers they gave were about what they had seen there, how they had come here. They described the difficulties of the situation and how much they had to walk, so many deaths, then rapes and other fears, and that they were scared." From thematic analysis, the author's conclusions emphasize the importance of offering universal and comprehensive trauma-informed services to all refugees in this setting. They support mandatory survivor-centered and trauma-informed care training for all healthcare workers in such settings. They also encourage the provision of long-term, consistent screening with clear referral pathways and critical mental health services. And they emphasize the need for justice and accountability for the violations by the perpetrators. Our next article was the top scoring review paper of 2022 and comes from Gan et al. In the Frontiers in Pediatrics and was titled Contemporary Trends in Global Mortality of Sepsis Among Young Infants Less Than 90 Days, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. Our current knowledge of the global burden of infant sepsis is limited to mostly population-level data. Their objective, then, was to summarize global case fatality rates of young infants with sepsis stratified by gross national income and patient-level risk factors. The authors performed a systematic review and meta-analysis on case fatality rates among infants less than 90 days old with sepsis. They searched a variety of databases for articles from January 2010 to September of 2019 and collected over 6,000 papers from nearly 250 different studies. Overall, they found a pooled case fatality rate for infants with sepsis that was 18%. This was highest for low-income countries with a case fatality rate of 25%, followed by low and middle-income countries, which were almost 25%, and this was lowest for high-income countries, where the mortality rate was only 12%. The univariable regression demonstrated potentially higher case fatality rates for low birth weight infants, those born outside of high-income countries, those younger than 28 days, and those with culture-proven sepsis. On multivariable analysis, gross national income had the greatest impact on case fatality rates. Figure 5 from this important article demonstrates a time trend analysis of the case fatality rates in this study. Here, the size of the bubble is proportionate to the number of infants in the study, while the line represents the trends in case fatality rate over time. As you can see, there is an increasing trend in case fatality rate for low-income countries and a decreasing trend for middle and high-income countries. Overall, we see that the trend for young infant sepsis case fatality rates is increasing over time. To summarize, the review showed an overall case fatality rate of young infant sepsis of 18% with increasing disparity between low and middle income countries compared to high income countries. The factors they associated with higher case fatality rates were prematurity, low birth weight, age less than 28 days, early onset sepsis, hospital-acquired infections, and sepsis in middle and low income countries. These findings serve as a global call to action to achieve further reductions in young infant sepsis mortality. The authors note that future initiatives could focus on improving the delivery of care to infants at higher risk of sepsis, especially in these low and middle income countries. Our final article for this year comes from the Gray Literature Review. This year, among the more than 7,500 articles that were screened, 35 were selected for scoring, and only one article received a perfect score. The top scoring article from the Gray Literature Review was by Julien Potet et al., titled Snakebite Envenoming at MSF, a Decade of Clinical Challenges and Antivenom Access Issues. Briefly, MSF provides medical care in more than 70 countries and admits more than 7,000 cases of snakebite every year to their facilities. This article describes the activities against snakebites in 3 African countries, including the Central African Republic, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. Specifically, MSF has introduced a standard protocol using 2 different antivenoms depending on the patient's clinical syndrome, and a simple blood coagulation test performed to detect venom-induced coagulopathy. They have also implemented community-based activities that focus on preventative measures and emphasize prompt transport to the hospital. The authors conclude that provision of quality care and treatment, including antivenoms, without out-of-pocket payment by patients, has led to an increasing number of snakebite victims receiving appropriate care at MSF facilities. So on behalf of all of the contributors to the Global Emergency Medicine Literature Review, thank you for your attention. If you or someone you know might be interested in contributing to the review in the future, please consider applying to join our team with the next review this summer. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to take any questions. If there are any, you can come to the microphone in the middle. And it's also late this afternoon, so we can head home too. Thank you, everyone.